Okay. Are we? It says scheduled. Are we starting?
We are live.
Okay. Then thank you everyone for joining the Breaking Into Hollywood panel at FIT Diversity Con. My name is Gamal Hennessy. I am a comic book lawyer and business consultant, and I'd like to thank Joyce Brown, the president of FIT, and Ron Milan, the chief diversity officer, for giving us this forum to have this discussion. Now, before I actually introduce our speakers, I'd like to give a little background and context for comic books in other media, especially film and television. Because when you look at the history of comics, even before comics were a distinct art form, a lot of the characters and stories that were the precursors to comics, Doc Savage or Zorro or Lone Ranger, all kind of flowed freely between one kind of media and another. So you had radio programs, television programs, and then eventually short films. So when you had comics like Superman and Batman and all those kind of things, they instantly flowed back and forth between different media. So comics has always had a long history of coming off of the page and other forms. But what you really saw, and everyone in this panel is probably very much aware of it, is that we are now living in a different type of era in terms of comic book media. Because since 2009, with the rise of the MCU, up until the pandemic hit, you had more and more comic book properties making their way into mainstream media, whether it's television, film, Broadway plays, interactive games. So there's been more and more comic book material coming to just the major players like your Warner Brothers and your Disneys, but you now have.
Oops. Oh no.
Oh, we lost him.
Somebody finish the
I'm
sentence.
sure he'll come back very quickly. Should we introduce ourselves just to keep things flowing?
Good idea.
That's a good idea.
Sure. Great. I am Alex Segura. I'm the co-president of Archie Comics. I'm also a writer of comics and novels and podcasts, and that's the broad strokes for me. Oh, he's back.
He's back.
Yeah, I'm back. I said something very brilliant when the connection dropped, so you all just missed it because I'm not actually in a position to repeat it. So what I'm going to do now is ask everybody to introduce themselves across the panel. So please let me know, because we see your name, so let me know what company you work for and the major properties that you've been able to get into Hollywood productions or in the process of getting to. So Robert, why don't we start with you?
All right. My name is Robert Scull. I am the executive producer and one of the creators of Bubble Guppies, which is a preschool show on Nickelodeon, Nick Jr. It didn't come from a comic book, but we're in our 6th season now. Started about 10 years ago. I've done other shows on Nickelodeon. I ran Little Bill, and I did Janice Burgess's The Backyardigans a while back. All of these were developed for television specifically. And that's the end of my line.
That's good.
What else? Over to you, Vivek.
Lost them all again. Why don't I just jump in? Hi, everybody. I'm Vivek Tawari. Yes. I work for myself. My company is called Tawari Entertainment Group, and I do a variety of different things across a number of arts and entertainment fields. I'm probably best known for my work on the stage. I'm a producer of a number of Broadway musicals. Most recently, I'm the producer of Jagged Little Pill, based on the Alanis Morissette album. Before that, I was producer on American Idiot, based on the Green Day album, producer of The Addams Family, and my work goes all the way back to working on Mel Brooks, The Producers, Hairspray, A Raisin in the Sun. I have a lot of work in the stage. And most of that work is adaptive. It's adapted from something, whether it's The Addams Family adapted from those famous Charles Addams cartoon strips, or American Idiot and Jagged Little Pill adapted from very famous rock records. But probably the main reason that I'm on this panel today is regarding a non-stage project. It's the Fifth Beatle. It's a graphic novel that I wrote that came out on Dark Horse a number of years ago, first published at the end of 2013. And we've been adapted. We were adapting it for film, and we pivoted about a year ago to develop it for television instead. And so it's not out yet, but it's well on its way. And so, you know, it's been 7 years since the book came out, so there's been a long journey there. And you know, those of you who work in this field know that that's a real amount of time, but it's actually, these things take time. Some of you might be in the audience might be thinking, oh my gosh, that's a long time, but it's actually not in our industry. So there is a journey there to discuss, and I think that's probably the most interesting of my projects for this panel.
So, hi, everybody. My name is Shanty Harmayn. I'm from Base Entertainment, which is a film studio based in Jakarta in Singapore. Currently based in Jakarta. We are basically primarily a film studio focusing on live action films, primarily for the Indonesian market. But we also work on sort of sourcing like strong Southeast Asian properties, like Trece from the Philippines. That's the reason why I'm on this panel. With strong potential crossover production, basically. And Trece is our first property, which made it into a Hollywood production, is currently in production as a Netflix original animated series.
Great. I'm Alex Segura, as I mentioned. I'm the co-president of Archie Comics. That's Archie, Betty and Veronica, Jughead, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Josie and the Pussycats. In terms of media, you've seen those characters on the CW's Riverdale, Netflix's Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and also the other CW series, Katie Keene, all of which are based on Archie properties. I'm also the writer of crime novels. My Pete Fernandez mystery series has been optioned for TV. And I'm also the author of a number of comic books. And I was a showrunner on an iHeart podcast called Lethal Lit, which was one of the top 5 podcasts of 2018. So I can kind of see it from two perspectives, as a creative person and also as an executive too.
Okay. So what I'd like, now that we kind of know that there's this broad range of different types of properties that can make it onto the screen, and there's different places that things can go, I just want to kind of take a step back and let people know, especially there's a lot of people here probably making comics and want to get their comics into other media, but kind of bring back the reality that getting your comic into Hollywood is still a very rare occurrence, even in the 21st century, because you have the cost of production for a TV series, movie, whatever, relative to a comic is much higher. So the risk is much higher in getting that production onto the screen. And there's so much competition to get a property noticed and picked up in options, even with all the different streaming options and TV options there are now. So if everybody could actually walk through the specific journey that they had to take for their property to kind of get onto the big screen, to kind of let people know the diversity of different ways you actually have to break in, I think that would be very helpful. So Vivek, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so you know, I'll answer that question in relation to the Fifth Beatle. As I mentioned, it's a graphic novel that I wrote for Dark Horse Comics. I mean, I say I wrote it for Dark Horse Comics, but technically, from a business standpoint, it was a licensing deal, which means that I wrote it for myself and we put it out through Dark Horse. They were real partners on the project, but the reason that I say that is that it is a long-time labor of love for me. The Fifth Beatle is based on the life of the manager, Brian, who discovered the band. He basically came up with the suits and the haircuts and got them a record deal when no one wanted to sign them. He basically was the guy who behind the scenes engineered Beatlemania and gave the world the Beatles. And he also did all of that while he was gay and Jewish and from Liverpool. And in the 1960s, those were 3 tremendous obstacles. And so while I am none of those things, when I found myself a young kid from New York's Lower East Side of Indian origin, who didn't want to be an engineer or a doctor, which were the fields that were expected of young Indian kids who had some means and opportunity. I wanted to write comic books and produce Broadway musicals and do those kinds of things. The Brian Epstein story was very inspiring to me. I thought if the gay Jewish kid from Liverpool could bring the world the Beatles, why couldn't the weirdo Indian kid from the Lower East Side write comic books and produce work in show business? So it really is a genuine labor of love. I describe Brian as my historical mentor. So I preface everything I say with that because it is a hard journey. If you're taking a property that you're passionate about and trying to bring it to comics or to the screen, you really have to care. It's not the kind of thing you have to be willing to spend many, many years on it. As I mentioned, the book came out in 2013 and we're still developing it for the screen 7 years later. And there were probably a good 10 years of that it took to get the book made from, if you're starting to count from when I started doing my research. So, by the time the Fifth Beatle makes it to the screen, it's maybe a 2-decade journey. And that doesn't bother me because I'm passionate about it, because it's a genuine labor of love. And the journey has been, it's been a trip. There's no question about it. Like when I started working on the adaptive process about 7 years ago from when the book came out, we were very much thinking of it as a film. The very first thing that I set out to do was acquire the music rights, because I personally feel it would be very difficult to tell the Brian Epstein story without access to Beatles music rights. And that was a journey. We secured them, but I'm literally the first and only time the Beatles have ever given their music catalog to a non-documentary about the band. There have been other films, if you've seen the recent Yesterday, but that was a fantasy. That wasn't about the band. It was a fantasy story. And if you've seen Across the Universe, that also had a lot of Beatles music in it. But again, it wasn't about the band. If you look at films or television shows about the band, like Backbeat or Nowhere Boy, you'll notice that there's no Beatles music in any of those projects because they've never approved one. So I won't, we can talk later if anyone's interested about that process of securing the music rights. But that was a long and arduous journey. It literally took 3 years to just get the music rights. So again, I go back to saying it has to be a labor of love, because 3 years in where you haven't even secured the music rights, no producer in their right mind would continue to do that unless they really cared about the project, which I did. I believed that it was worth the wait. So that was the first step, was securing the music rights. And after that, it was, sort of figuring out how we were going to do it as a film. Was it going to be at a major studio? Was it going to be done independently? And we took a lot of meetings on all fronts. And I'll backtrack a second and say, just even the choice of comics publisher is what, I had to be very careful there, because there was, because it was a Beatles related project, it caught a lot of attention, and I had two great artists working on it, Andrew Robinson and Kyle Baker. And so there was a lot of interest in the comics industry. DC Vertigo was interested, and the deal that I would have signed with Vertigo would have required the film rights to be with Warner Brothers. And ultimately I decided that was not something that I was willing to commit to at the very beginning of the graphic novel's life. The rights would have been tied up on Warner Brothers, but they weren't committing to put it out through Warner Brothers. And so I was very fearful that my rights would have been tied up and it might have sat on a shelf for many years. Dark Horse is a much more artist-friendly place. And I say that with love. Vertigo's a great company. But Dark Horse that has a history of letting creators own their rights and working with them to get it to film and TV. And so that felt better to me. So the choice started from way back then. So I decided that I was going to pursue a more independent path for the film. And there was a journey there, and I won't get into details there because I want to turn it over to some of my fellow panelists. But as we went through the trials and tribulations of getting it off the ground as a film, just the film and television industry changed. And about a year and a half ago, we had concluded one chapter of trying to get it off the ground as a film, and a certain path that I was on didn't materialize. And I looked at the environment and I thought, television has changed. Limited series were all of a sudden like a thing that, or I shouldn't say all of a sudden, in my mind, it was kind of a throwback to when I was a kid. When I was a kid, limited series there were a lot of those. I was a huge fan of V and V: The Final Battle for those older sci-fi geeks in the audience. limited series were things that was around when I was a kid, but then they kind of went away. And then in the wake of the success of the streamers, they were kind of coming back. I mean, when I started working on the Fifth Beatle, there was no Netflix, there was no Amazon was not doing films, there was no Hulu, so all of a sudden there were new players. So we decided that that we should do the Fifth Beatle as a television show. And so, for the past few years, we've been working along those lines. So it's been a real journey. And I would say part of why it's been taking so long is my desire to hold on to the rights. I wrote the graphic novel, and I am a writer, and I care about that. So, I want to write the screenplay or the teleplays myself, and I want to retain a lot of control over it. The fact that I secured the Beatles music rights and they gave me that honor also feels like a responsibility. Like I can't screw that up. Like, I have to honor the fact that the band trusts me and the fans trust me. So as a result of all of those things, it's just taking longer than it might otherwise. But I honestly believe if I had gone for an easier path, like, going with Vertigo and having the rights be at Warner Brothers, I might have gotten a payoff in the earlier days, but it might also still be sitting on a shelf, or it might have, have had its expiration date, and I might have had to realize that it's never happening. Whereas, like, I remain confident that it's going to happen, and it's just taking that journey that these projects sometimes do to get to a place where I will be proud of it and the fans will feel taken care of. So anyway, I'll stop there. I know I've talked for a little while. Please, I apologize for dominating so much time. Let me pass it off to one of my cohorts here.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. Just seeing.
No worries. Shanty, why don't you?
Okay.
Okay.
So Alex, shall I?
Go ahead. Yeah. No.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we've all got a lag.
Okay. For Tresse, so Tresse is a graphic novel created by the brilliant Budget Tan and Kajo Bellissimo. And for us from base, especially myself and Tanya Yuson, who are the first one who basically work on this, we work with Budget and Kajo, and we have to convince them, like, okay, like, work with us. And so it's all about trust, because we're the producers, we're not the writers. So we need to explain to Budget of the journey that we're going to go through, and the fact that the journey might be very long. So that was very clear from the very beginning, and we don't even know where the journey is going to go. So even for us, the producers, so it took us a while to have the property set up. And mind you, we're from Southeast Asia, so there's always budget constraints. Even if in the US there's budget constraints, then in juxtaposition, this is even smaller, basically. And for us to get it set up, it took a while, because it's always the question about, so because this is a Filipino IP, because we picked it up because it's so strong in local content, but yet also very strong in crossover potential. So the question is always, so in our discussion with many parties over so many years, is, so which market are you making it for? So is it the Philippine market? Is it the Southeast Asian market? Is it English language? So that's always back and forth, is like that. And because the market at that time was not as growing as this time when we started, so and the Southeast Asian market is also very fragmented. So it's a lot. There's a lot of people, but we all spoke different languages. So if it's just for this market, it's not enough. If this is market, then but they don't speak this language. So it's very frustrating, actually. And then if you say, let's do it in English, just for this in English, do you think that the audience will gauge? So it's first the market, and then the language, and then always the question about the budget whether the budget fits the market or the language. So it's go back and forth like that for a lot of years. And in the beginning, it's always about live action. Actually, we never thought about it as an animated series. In the end, we're very grateful that finally we worked with Netflix, and I think it was the best combination and the best platform for Trece. Yeah. So in the nutshell, something like that.
Okay. Alex, do you want to jump in and give us your perspective? Because you have a much more established property. Because I remember like Josie and the Pussycat and like that kind of stuff animated from like the mid 80s. So there's a much longer history there.
Yeah, I mean, Archie will be celebrating our 80th anniversary next year, which is very exciting,
Wow.
and it's just a testament to the IP. I do want to kind of harken back to the initial question, which is, what would the advice be to someone who's looking to make it? And it really all starts with the work. It really starts with the original graphic novel, the original story, and I think there's a real turning point for Archie where John Goldwater, our CEO, came in and said we need to make this IP much more vibrant, much more present, much more like it feels like it's happening today as opposed to in some kind of Pleasantville type scenario. And that's when you started seeing things like, Kevin Keller, a diverse cast. You started seeing Archie, Afterlife with Archie, like horror takes on the IP. And then we relaunched the main Archie book with Mark Waid writing and Fiona Staples on art, to, A-list comic book talents. And that, I think, really changed the perspective people had on Archie. It wasn't just like this sitcom-y comic strip that was drawn in a set way and could only do so many things. It really opened up the floodgates. And so that's when I think we started seeing more of a receptiveness from studios and from media companies, realizing like, okay, we can take this IP, we can kind of stretch it and tweak it, and it'll still be Archie. It'll still be, Jughead still eats burgers, Betty and Veronica are still who they are. It's just a different kind of setup. So I think my first bit of advice to any creator looking to see their comic become something else is worry about the comic, make it as great as it can be, make that original source material so compelling in that medium that people will be drawn to the content. And then the second thing is, as a creator, I've been through this before, you just want to make sure you're buttoned up in terms of your contracts and your collaborative agreements. Comics is a collaborative medium. That means you have to get in the weeds on stuff like IP, percentages, who owns what, who has a stake in what. And you really have to have that ready to go before you can approach anyone about an option. And, so many journeys, especially publishing and media, are long, as we've noted before. It's a long road, and none of those tentpole moments are the peak. You get an agent, that doesn't mean you've won. You get that deal, the option, it doesn't mean it's going to be a show. I mean, my novels have been optioned and they're not on TV yet. It's just part of the journey. So I think you need to be willing to play the long game and be passionate and engaged in the content and make sure that's as strong as it can be. And then just make sure that the technical and legal side is as buttoned up as you can make it as well, with your collaborators and with your partners, like we were talking about before, finding the right publishing partner, finding the right media partner, and making sure that your viewpoints are aligned so you can get that greatest exposure you want.
Yes.
Robert, you're up, sir.
Yeah, here I am. I unmuted. Yeah, I'm going to be the fourth person to say it takes a long time. You've got to have perseverance and patience. I was the director of animation development for Nickelodeon a bunch of years ago for a year, and there were a couple comic book properties that came through, and it was interesting to see how that journey goes, because a lot of time, I guess my first piece of advice would be, you don't necessarily want to show up with just your IP and say, make a show for me, because a company will, and I think it's very similar in movies, the company will say, well, what else do you bring to the table besides the IP? We want your vision. We want you to be behind the production. So it's a good idea. I think you'll have writers, of course, for your comic, but to have somebody with animation experience, an animation producer, or even better, a director who can help you see it through to a version of your comic that the way you want to see it, because it's going to transform between what you have on the page and how that plays, and all the pieces of from timing. A comic reads so much differently than watching something on video or film. So you want to have somebody to partner with that can help you translate that looks and feels and sounds the way you hear it. Sound is actually a big, it stuck with me. Bill Watterson, the Calvin and Hobbes creator, for example. He didn't want to go he had a million offers to do TV or movies, and he rejected them because he said, I just can't hear Hobbes speaking. He wants you to have the voice, the reader, to have the voice in your head. So there's a lot to think about. How do you want it to come out? Because you don't want to go wildly into, here, big company, make my comic into something and lose control. So make sure you've got partners that you trust.
Okay, thank you. So I really want to touch on something that all of you have actually brought up, which is the timing aspect and how long the journey is to get from finished comic to something on screen. And what I'd like everybody to kind of comment on is how you actually adapt to the industry itself that you're looking to get into, changing as you're going through that journey. So like Vivek, you explained that when you were starting, you wanted to start out with a movie because when you had the original idea, it was about movies. But then came Netflix, and then came HBO, and then came all this other stuff. So can each of you talk about how you would recommend dealing with not only changes in your story, but changes in the business environment and the entertainment environment as a whole, especially when you're looking at something like the fact that we're all doing this online now because we can't meet up because we have a pandemic that's actually severely hit movie theaters and a lot of different, like movie production itself, a lot of productions are shut down. So how would you actually advise people to adapt to those kind of things? Shanti, why don't we start with you?
Yes. It's throughout the years that we were developing per se, we went through so many, adjustments, basically. At first, I think we're also a bit early for Southeast Asia at that time. So we wanted to do series, and then it didn't work. Primarily, I think it was also about budget. And mind you, at that time, the streamers haven't basically come into the region, like come in full force. Netflix was not there yet. Many platforms were not there yet. So this is like early years. And so we wanted to do series with one platform, one studio, and then it didn't work out for the budget. And then we moved into the potential of making it into a movie. Again, like what I mentioned before, it didn't work out because of course the market. I think primarily the market that we were aiming for was not ready. So whatever discussion, market language, budget, nothing fits. So we need to, every time we jump into another discussion, it's like, oh, how long this discussion will take before the discussion collapse. So I guess I'm not trying to be disheartened, but I think, again, I want to say what Robert was saying. It needs perseverance because you're going to go through so many discussions, and it doesn't mean that, in hindsight we say, oh wow, thank God that we went through all that, and thank goodness that we took notes. Oh, this doesn't work because of this. So for the next discussion, we took notes what discussion before. Oh, that doesn't work, so let's not go there anymore. We move to the next one. But maybe then the next one is it's not necessarily the answer as well. So it really evolves with time. And again, and we're also trying to basically so for Trece, that's the journey. And up, and then at the
We lost
tail,
Um,
the streamers come in, and then so yeah, we have to adjust again. So basically something
I
like
think
that.
we lost her. Alex,
Oh, am I back?
You're back.
Okay,
You're
I'm
back.
yes, you're back.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, so basically we went through so many permutations and so many different type of platforms and type of deals and type of setup. So it's about people who you meet. It's about perseverance, and it's about having in the end good partner. 'Cause we're trying to be a good partner also to Budget and Kajo, who is the author of the graphic novel, and basically, always update them about, okay, this is, we're going to this one next, and explain why it doesn't work. So we're always keeping them up to date, because we're not the authors, and we're just trying to basically make sure that their work will have the best place, basically. So yeah.
That is very interesting. It is challenging and something I'm still trying to learn, that you want to keep the integrity of what you're pitching and what you're trying to get made, but you have to be limber and not just, you can't just hunker down and say no, dig in and reject any notes or any changes, but you also want to be limber and allow it to evolve. And then again, back to time, over the period of time it takes to make the appetite for serialized or short form or not, comedy, or everything shifts. So you really have to be limber as well, but still maintain your love for the integrity of what you've created.
Now, Vivek, I know that did you have limitations on how limber you could be because you were telling a documentary story, and there was certain, because you were basically taking licensed material and biographical material, were there more contractual limitations that you had when you were trying to get your thing made?
No, I mean, so the Fifth Beatle is as I said, it's a graphic novel that I wrote, and it's his life story, but it's told, as I use the medium of comics, or at least if I did my job correctly. You'll have to read it and tell me what you think. I've really used the medium of comics to its full extent, and it's a piece of art. There's fantasy sequences, hallucination sequences, dream sequences. So it's not a biography. I call it a graphic novel. I don't call it a biography. Now it's based on 20 plus years of research into Brian's life, which is another story. I'm probably the world's leading Brian Epstein expert. I mean, it really is a subject I know a lot about, and I speak at Beatles conventions about. So it is based on a tremendous amount of fact and biographical research, but it's told in a way that, again, if I've done my job correctly, that involves a lot of poetry. So the contractual obligations that I face were not about the narrative. The narrative is mine. I'm the writer, and it's based on facts that I research. So I know that what is real and based in fact and what isn't. So the contractual obligations really are with the music rights. I had there's certain limitations to what how many and it's really about cost. Like if you use X number of seconds, it's this amount of cost, and what I can do with trailers and what I can do with end credits, and things that are probably less interesting to the folks on this panel. But it's so the real heart of it is the things that Shanti and Robert have already said. It's about being able to look at the environment that's out there, packaging your work in a way that's attractive to that environment, and being able, Robert used the word limber. The word that I always use is nimble. You need to be able to kind of to be true to your story. The story always has to come first, but then be nimble. If you see that it's hard to get a film like this off the ground, and more people are and they're more buyers in the television world, then you need to be able to be nimble and start looking at thinking, can I do this at TV? And for me, that was really exciting, because I've done 20 plus years of research into Brian's life. The idea of having a 6 to 8 hour palette in which to tell his story, and to get to tell many, many stories that I didn't get to tell in my 120 page graphic novel, that was super exciting. But if that doesn't serve your story, because your story doesn't have 8 hours worth of material, it only has 2 hours worth of material, then don't stretch it out just for the medium. Like, you have to be true to your story, and you just have to find a way to get it made at film, because it needs to be a film. So on one hand, you do have to be very nimble on it, but everything has to, I think that's something Alex said, everything has to stem from the source material, from your story. Like, what is the story you want to tell, and are you super passionate about it? And both of those things have to be a yes, and then everything has to flow from that. But the way that it flows from that, you have to be limber, as Robert put it, and nimble is the way that I put it.
I like nimble better. I'm going to start using that.
Limber is good too. I think they're a little different. I think they are different.
Nimble sounds faster.
To
They're
me,
both
like,
good. They're both good.
I mean, we're I guess, like,
Not limber or nimble, but the original.
I think.
Yeah, I'm neither of those things, so I'd like to hear about them.
No, your point, Robert, about being limber is sort of like, you have to be flexible in what you're doing and how you're telling it. Nimble to me is the ability to move very quickly, to be like, okay, there's no opportunity to film. Well, then I'm not going to be sad about that. I'm immediately going to pivot to television. It's like, you just it's about moving quickly, whereas limber is about being more fluid, I think. And it's semantics here, but I sort of think you really do need to be both,
Yeah.
You need to limber up so you can be nimble.
There you go.
There it is.
Yeah.
Well put. So, Alex, in terms of watching the environment change, I mean, I know you said your president came in and said the take on the characters had to change to fit with the times. But how did such a long-running IP kind of adapt to the different generations of technology and content consumption that you flowed through?
Yeah, I mean, I like to joke that Archie is the oldest overnight success in the history of pop culture. I mean, when Riverdale came out, the response was huge, and there was a sense of surprise, especially when people realized Riverdale is the same Archie comic that people knew as kids. So I think the first step was in story, making sure the story reflected the world today and didn't feel dated. And then, like everyone else has noted on the panel, it's a long journey. It's a marathon full of highs and lows. There's lots of peaks and valleys in this process, whether it's publishing or just getting your stuff onto the screen. A lot of people don't remember this because they think that Riverdale just kind of appeared on their TV screens, but it was initially supposed to be a film. It was going to be, Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, who is the showrunner on the TV show and the showrunner on Chilling Adventures of Sabrina and Katie Keene. It was supposed to be a film, and then at one point it was at Fox, and then it ended up at the CW, and it became a show. And then, you have to be ready for the process, for the waves of the process to take you in different directions. As long as they stick to the core belief of these characters, and I think the feeling from John Goldwater, our CEO, and Roberto and the entire team is, as long as these feel true to the characters, whether they're in weird, crazy noir situations or whether Sabrina is much darker than maybe the cartoony comic book version that people are familiar with, they still need to be true to the characters. And so we'll kind of go where the winds of the media take us, whether it's a streamer like Netflix for Chilling Adventures or a traditional network like CW or even a film. We have to just kind of go with what is the best fit for the story, but the story has to still be true to the characters. And I think that was our guiding light, and that's really served us well. And, it's something I try to think about with my own properties. What will retain the essence of this idea, the idea that hopefully people resonate, or are feeling some kind of connection to in the original form, and what's the best way to translate that to another medium. So, it's not easy. That's why it takes so long. It's finding the right partners, it's finding that right path, and then also kind of seeing it through to fruition. So.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm going to ask one more question before I open it up to the audience. So if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, please feel free to type it in the comments, and then once we get to it, I will read them off for our panelists to answer. So I think the last question I want to ask, because we have this underlying theme of perseverance and adapting through time, is how do you all of you actually see, I mean, because you have to look 2 or 3 years ahead to see where the market is actually going. What do you actually see in the next 4 or 5 years in terms of the environment of how people are going to consume comic related stories? I mean, I know we've talked about film and television, but there's also, you know, there have been Broadway theatrical productions. There is, you know, a strong through line of video games and things like that. So where do you guys see the consumption of comic related material going? And like, is it going to be, how is it going to change getting a story that you have onto the screen? Alex, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. Yeah, I think you'll see fewer filters. I mean, especially in this post and hopefully a soon to be post-pandemic world. I think you'll see less, you know, this has to be in a theater first and then it'll be on streaming. I think you'll see more immediate and more, you know, kind of sudden media being accessible on all platforms. And that kind of dovetails really with our philosophy at Archie, which is to make sure our stories and our characters are as accessible to people in any way possible. So, you know, we're on the newsstand, we're in bookstores, we're digitally available. We just announced a deal with Webtoon, which is a huge digital comics hub. And so I think you'll just see fewer hurdles that consumers have to jump through to get the content they want, whether it's on their phone, whether it's on their TV screens or computer screens. I think we've experienced this period of time where everything is virtual and everything is immediate because we can't leave our houses. But I don't think that's going to go away when we can leave, hopefully sooner rather than later. So I think then it becomes a question of what's the best of these platforms to get to the most people immediately. Is it a streaming series? Is it everything dropping at once like you do on Netflix? Is it a movie that drops on a certain day? Is it a web comic or, you know, a web serial? So I think the buffet has gotten a lot bigger and it's become much more immediate. And now it makes it a little more challenging from our standpoint because we have to not only take that immediate gratification of, oh, okay, somebody wants to make a TV show. Now it's like, well, what kind of TV show is it going to be? What kind of movie is it going to be? What's our narrative technique to best serve the story? So I think it's this new Wild West is not without its own challenges.
Shanti, what did you think?
I think I can only speak on behalf of sort of like the Southeast Asian market, which I think is a bit unique. Let me just give a short intro a little bit. So we're a very growing market, including in cinema. I mean, this is pre-COVID time. For instance, like Indonesia was growing at 20% per annum for the past 3 years, like consistently. So more screens in cinema. So the past 2 years, we see a lot of local top comic books are being adapted into feature film because of the growth of the cinema. So there's enough budget, at least sufficient budget to make it into a feature film, actually for the first time in the film industry. But now with COVID, I still think that if the situation is a little bit under control, I still see a rebound for theaters. I don't know whether we're going to go back to the same growth before it. I hope so. But now that the streamers is entering the market full force, especially this year during the pandemic, I mean, we're the second or the third country for Disney Plus. So Disney Plus just opened in Indonesia in September. So now it's a market where Netflix and Disney Plus is head to head, basically. So it's you can see the growth, and I foresee a demand of streaming content going so high up in this year and the following year. So I can see. I think there will be a combination of some property will still go to cinema, because some people will still wait until the cinema will be open. But definitely there will be more demand for all the comics, and especially comics online, because here the way the comics are being consumed is mostly through digital. So I already see a lot of several few top comic from line being adapted to screen, and I foresee they'll be adapted to series. So yeah.
Okay. Viv, before you answer, I want to let you know what the question was, so we don't like surprise you. It was basically, how do you see the consumption market for comic-related media changing in the next 3 to 5 years? Now that because it takes such a long time to get a property on, to where you want it to be. Looking forward, where do you actually see the content market going? Vivek, how would you like to respond to that question?
I'll be honest, I don't have much to add to what Alex and Shanti already said. I think they really put it pretty eloquently. I mean, I think the demand for material that came from the comics world is just going to increase. I mean, we're all here because we love comics, right? This is a Comic-Con at heart, and we love comics because it's a great medium for telling great stories. And to echo the first thing Alex said, it's all about the story, right? And so with the comics is a medium for great stories, and great stories will survive. And so I honestly, I don't want to take up any more time. I think Alex and Shanti nailed it with what they said.
Okay, Robert, you have any other thoughts to add before we open it up to questions?
Oh boy, I missed some of that. I fell out for a minute, but
Well, it's fine.
Whose siren is that?
Oh, that's me. Sorry.
Sounds like New York.
Yeah, that's what it is. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, well, I kind of missed the question. Can you give it back to me real quick?
The question basically was, because it takes such a long time to get a comic from the printed page to the screen, and because the industry might change in that period while you're doing that development, what do you actually see happening in the market in the next 3 to 5 years, so that people listening to this might be able to actually anticipate some changes in the market as they're trying to get their book from the page to the screen?
I don't think you need to do anything different than, like these guys said, keep coming up with great stories, and especially great characters, a strong property. The world is going to be really hungry for more content, more than ever. And one of the great news about comic books, entertainment is, standing pretty strong during all of this. So it's just going to keep going. But I don't know that I could recommend anything different that you'd want to do other than keep on keeping on.
I think the one thing that I would add is that we're living now in a world of like a long tail. So every story, every concept can actually find its own audience. So the idea is that you need to, when you're bringing this IP to another medium, before you do that, it kind of helps to actually have a pre-existing audience, a pre-existing fan base that you can build off of to build that excitement. So, because I have quite a few clients in my practice who have the idea they're going to make a comic, and before issue 2 comes out, Netflix is going to give them a deal, and that's where all the money is going to come from. And as I think you guys have all successfully and thankfully pointed out, that this is a very long journey, which means the concept itself, the story itself, has to be sustainable in the market for a long period of time. You can't expect to put out 1 issue or maybe 2 issues and then say, okay, where's my Netflix deal? If you're looking at somebody like a Todd McFarlane, he's had like a movie and a TV show, but that's over 350 issues. It's a longer process that you have to be ready to maintain in the comics before you can even decide you're going to jump to another screen. So I think now is a good time. We have about 10 minutes left to field some questions. So
I would just add to that. The Cinderella stories are Cinderella stories for a reason. Those miraculous, like I put out 1 comic and now it's a franchise, tentpole franchise. Those things don't happen routinely. Routinely, you're in the trenches and you're pitching and you're going through the motions and you're there's a lot of highs and lows. So I think in any creative endeavor, just be ready to take rejection the same way you would take successes. Like keep it level, have faith in your content, and the rest will hopefully fall in place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get some questions, and then we can hopefully help people out. I don't actually see any questions.
Well, then, to your point about having one comic and hoping for a show or a movie, brand recognition is everything. So people are much more inclined to developing something that's known. So you got to get your comic out there, have a known property, do it for the comic's sake, and then maybe someday. But certainly, otherwise, you're just giving them a package that means nothing to them.
There's a whole oh, go ahead.
I think there are certain cases where you can work with pre-existing known brands and maybe only have like one thing come out. Like Vivek, if you're doing something on the Fifth Beatle, and the Beatles are one of the most iconic bands in the history of music, well then maybe you don't need 300 issues of the Fifth Beatle before you get some interest. Like he said, he got interest very quickly, but that's because of the subject matter and the pre-existing fan base, pre-existing brand.
Yeah, I mean, look, it again all goes back to like, packaging really, to make your piece as exciting as it can be. Like, the fact that I wanted to make a graphic novel based on the life of the Beatles manager, like that was exciting because the word Beatles was in there, so people would immediately listen. But that wasn't enough. I needed to have Andrew Robinson and Kyle Baker. Like I needed to have some great artists on board, And the fact that we then had a hit graphic novel, like that wasn't enough to get a film or TV. I needed music rights. And then that isn't even enough. It's not made yet. We need to add a director and a cast. And like, it's not enough to just have a great idea or even a great brand. Like even the Beatles weren't enough to just like magically make it happen. Like I had to still put things around it. And going back to that thing about like, putting out one comic and dreaming of it happening, or, by issue 4, I'll have my Netflix deal. Like I honestly can't emphasize enough that you should not be making a comic in order to make a film or a TV show. Like if any of you, like, and I'm hoping that everybody in this audience who's here at a Comic-Con is here because they love comics. But like, if you're here because you think I'm going to write a comic book in order to make a film or a TV show, I hate to break it to you, like that's not going to happen. Like, the ones that happen because they're good comics. Like you have to be writing a comic because you love comics, because you want to make a great comic, and then there have to be other reasons why you want to take it to film or TV, because the medium will allow you to tell different stories or tell it in a different way. Or for me, with a limited series, I get to tell more of the Brian Epstein story, 6 hours, if it's the graphic novel, if you were just going to adapt my graphic novel, it couldn't be more than an hour and a half or 2 hours because it's 120 pages. So that's a reason to do more, but like, if you want to make a film or a TV show, then write a screenplay and go hustle your screenplay. Like, don't make a comic and dream about getting your comic adapted.
Well, I'd also add to that readers are very smart. A reader can suss out whether a comic is a comic that was born out of passion or it was a comic that a screenwriter wanted to do a low ROI, like, take a small risk and have it produced and be able to hand that to a producer. So yeah, the passion has to be on the page. And I think that comes from a passion for the medium and then seeing that translated into something else for sure.
It's interesting you gentlemen bring that up, because there are quite a few emerging comic book companies in the past 5-10 years who, the essential element of their business model is we are making comics that will translate into other media, whether you're talking about AWA or Scout or Aftershock Media or a lot of these emerging publishing companies. That is the business model. And I think you guys have the right concept that it has to be focused on the story first and you focus on the comic first, focus on the love of the medium. But it is not to say that there are not quite a few people in the market who have been successful in the comic book field who are basing their entire business model on what we are now saying you probably don't want to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's different if you're looking at it from a corporate perspective. Like, you know, I think that if you are a company and your business model is like, we're going to make X number of comics and we're going to make X number of films or TV shows, you know, and that's how we're going to make our business work, like, that's a smart business model, you know, but like those comics still need to be good comics. I would argue if that's your business model and you're just making comics and you're like, I'm going to make cinematic comics that are obviously adaptable, those comics will be bad. Fanboys and fangirls will see right through them in a second, and that company's not going to succeed, you know. But if you're a company that like also, you know, has ambitions to do it all, like, that's a smart business. I mean, that sounds like a smart business.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those companies have really strong comic book pedigrees. I mean, Mike Martz is a veteran editor at Aftershock, and Axel Alonso is up at AWA, and I know Brendan at Scout. So I think it all comes from a passionate comic book base. So like you know, you just said, if it's your business decision to eventually kind of maximize your IP, I don't think there's any harm in that, as long as the initial comic book is great.
Yeah. Yeah. I was on the board of directors of Valiant for the rebooted Valiant Entertainment. I left when DMG essentially took over the company, so I haven't been on the board for a while. But I was there when we acquired the original IP and sort of relaunched the company, and that was in a large part what I just described. Were a number of people in the executive ranks there who loved comics, who came from the comics world, but internally the business model of how we were going to succeed as a company was always like, we need to eventually make some movies because that's going to make some money for us. But it was never about making the books to make the movies. It was never about that. Like, let's make the comics as awesome as they can be, and film and TV love a great story, and if we've told great stories, there will be opportunities there. But we'll figure those out as we go along. Like, it was always like sort of separate, but both have to happen if the business is going to succeed in the long term.
It's always about the story, basically, especially for producer like myself, who like source stories from not just comics, from everything. So we look at so many comics before, like, when we pick Trece, we also look at like hundreds of comics, and it's always and forever will be about good story. Because another part, making film and making series is also a very difficult, a very difficult venture. So it needs to be worth it. It needs to, in the end, translate to screen. And it's again, only a fraction. There's only one step out of the 100 steps that we need to do before it becomes on screen or on the streamers. So it's always about good story and good character, no matter what. So
yeah.
I think that's going to be a good place to leave it. I'd like to thank all of my panelists for braving the elements and the technical difficulties to run this chapter.
And the fire,
I'd like to thank
the sirens out of New York City.
Exactly. I'd like to thank everybody who actually listened to the panel. And again, thank FIT for hosting DiversityCon. So everybody have a good day. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, everybody.
thank
you so much.
everybody. Bye.
Stay safe and healthy, everyone.
Yes, take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.